Oh, I can't get used to having a woman on the bridge.
It's what you say. Hello and welcome to another episode of TrekHammer, where we're talking about every single episode of Star Trek, from the original series right the way through to the latest episodes. Today, we're covering an episode that we actually missed, because it's not on the Blu-rays for Season 1 or Season 2 of the original series. It's actually as an additional extra on the final disc of Season 3. But that seems a little out of place. So, before we get to the next set of stories where we're coming up to the menagerie, let's talk about the original pilot episode, The Cage. One of my friends, when I was talking to him recently, mentioned that after first seeing The Cage, they thought, wow, this seems an awful lot like The Next Generation, rather than a classic series episode. And I think that is the perfect way to sum up what The Cage is. It's regarded as too cerebral, according to NBC. Too cerebral for what they'd booked for Star Trek. So Gene Roddenberry, when he made it, he'd promised them a wagon train to the stars. And he didn't give them that. They were right to say no. But it was good. It was very interesting. Apparently, according to the little introduction that Gene Roddenberry puts on the Blu-ray of Star Trek Season 3, he says that one of the NBC executives said this episode made him feel like he was on board a real ship, a real spaceship. And that is why they got another chance. I love that. So let's talk about what actually happens in The Cage. We're talking about this slightly extended version, which is different to the version I had on VHS back in the 90s, and I'll talk a bit about that as we go through it. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyagers of the Starship Enterprise that's not the Enterprise you know. On board is Christopher Pike, captain of the ship, and his first officer, Number One, whose name we never hear in the entirety of the episode, and Mr. Spock, who shouts a lot and is emotional, because Leonard Nimoy had this great thing of acting the opposite to the leading man. So when Kirk was emotional, full of heart, the courageous, optimistic hero, Mr. Spock was an unemotional Vulcan. But when Captain Pike's there, and he's a worn-out captain who's thinking of actually just leaving the surface and going home because he's so tired. He's sick of always deciding who lives and who dies. He's very unemotional and held in. Mr. Spock is the opposite. He's the highly emotional, eager to get in there Vulcan man. It's a great idea. The contrast is perfect. So whichever way you go, Mr. Spock is Mr. Spock. Comparable and yet contrasting to the leading man. Very nicely done. So what we end up with is this captain who is eager to just go home. He's tired. He's sick of having to decide who lives and who dies. He wants an easy life. He is offered that easy life. When he gets captured by these people on Talos 4, the Talosians say, here is your perfect life. This is exactly what you keep saying to yourself that you want. Have a lovely wife who loves you and live every day, go out and have a picnic lunch, ride some horses. You will be happy here. This is exactly what you want. And he realizes, no, it's not. Because that's not life. Life in a cage is no life. He's been captured because they need essentially a slave race to rebuild their society. Now, I'm not entirely certain that they really know what they want either, and the idea of what they say is extraordinary at the end. Because they want people to breed who can be given instructions and who will understand those instructions and live up to them and do what they're told. But at the end of the story, they say, oh, don't bring anyone here to help us, because all that'll happen is they too will learn the powers of our mind and they too will destroy themselves. So, essentially, it mirrors what Captain Pike is going through. His ideal life, it turns out to not be what he wanted, because it's too restrictive. He doesn't have the freedom that he has as a starship captain. Meanwhile, these people, they want a species that can help them to rebuild their society because they have destroyed their world. But by bringing in a species that could help them, the humans apparently are the perfect species, they too would learn the powers that the Telosians use to destroy themselves. So they can't have what they want either. It's not possible. Neither can grasp their dream because there's always going to be consequences. I like that as a story. That is a great mirror between protagonist and antagonist. There's no villain here. There's no villain in the entire story. It's protagonist and antagonist, people who wanted something that they can't have. It's also very well put together because every single point where they try to tempt Pike, it's like, look at this. Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this something you could sell your soul for? And at every point he's going, no, because the temptations, they get more and more extreme. But by being more extreme, they're further and further from what he actually wants. And at the point where he realizes he's in the cage and he starts to plot what he's going to do to try and get out of there, they're all saying, look at what he's doing. We can predict he's going to do this, he's going to do that. And then it turns out they can't tell everything, because if he gets really angry, he essentially blocks out any thoughts, acts on impulse. They can't handle that. Ooh. So by being the species that they think they want, they've realized that he has too much control. He can fight back. I love this episode, and I think if this had been put out on the TV in the 60s, Star Trek would have become the successor to the Twilight Zone, because it's that kind of cerebral thing, the be careful what you wish for type of thing, instead of being what it turned out to be, which was the foundation of an entire franchise. So in some ways, it's probably for the best that we didn't get what we would have liked either. It goes through the next level. It's a great episode. I really like it. I'm so glad that we're now getting episodes where Captain Pike and his crew are being fleshed out, because that's lovely to see. Although I don't think we're getting all of the crew that were in that particular episode, because Strange New Worlds is set just after it. There's a reference to the Telosians in season 2 of Discovery, so this is set after the cage, and it's interesting that they've gone down that route because it means they can swap out some of the crew. But I did like the episode. The characterization is good. It's very different to what we ended up getting from Star Trek, obviously, but I loved it nevertheless, and I think it's a great episode. If you haven't seen it yet, I mean, who hasn't, but you never know. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching, but go into it knowing that it's not Star Trek as it was in the 60s. It's more Star Trek as it was in the 80s. It's years ahead of its time, essentially. And I still think it's well worth watching, even now. So, guys, for this one, I am going to give it my warp factor rating of warp factor 9.9, please, Mr. Sulu. It's almost perfect, not quite. Mr. Spock isn't right. No, not seriously. There are certain parts, like, oh, I can't get used to having a woman on the bridge. And then number one looks at Captain Pike like, what did you just say? And he says, oh, sorry, I don't think of you as a woman, that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but that's not how you say it. You know, it's like, I think of you as an officer first, not just as a woman, that kind of thing. But it's little bits like that. The sexism, it does shine through, and I think it takes away a little bit. So I can't give it a full 10 out of 10. But warp factor 9.9, please, Mr. Sulu. Absolutely. Guys, what did you think of this episode? Did you like it? Do you agree that it's more Next Generation than original series? It does really feel like it's the original Gene Roddenberry vision coming to life in TNG. So when he got a second chance, essentially. Well, third chance, the films were there as well. But I'm going off on a little rant now. What did you think about this episode? Do let me know in the comment section down below. Let's have a talk about Star Trek. I always do love a chat about Star Trek with you. But until next time, I've been Zoe Cook-Robinson. You've been watching TrekHammer. Live long and prosper. I'll see you next time. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk-Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.